Good. Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. We're back on Twitter. We're on the ACSOM Twitter page, so we must apologise for the last couple of weeks where we've been away from Twitter. I'm not quite sure what happened, but we're here for the big League Cup semi-final. I still call it the League Cup, Lawrence, always have done. The only time I ever used one of the sponsors' name was back in the day when it was called the Skull Cup, and I used to call it the Skull Cup. But even when we won it, when it was a Coca-Cola Cup, I just call it the League Cup. It's one of these traditional things that I've got. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. What about yourself? Is it the League Cup to you? Do you go with the sponsor?
League Cup for me, mate. League Cup for me. I mean, semi-final day, a lot to play for. I'm absolutely Celtic out my nut today.
I certainly have been.
Mate, the Hollywood legend, Tony Curran. And then about an hour and a half ago, the Celtic legend, George Connelly, who was nice enough to sign one of these for me down at the penalty spot.
Brilliant.
Denniston, mate,
One of the most famous League games that he played in. League Cup final. And, the thing is, right, he made his name, obviously scoring in the Scottish Cup final when he nicked the ball off John Gregg. He rounded the goalkeeper. It was a 4-0 victory. But during those two conversations, what we've done this morning, I was there to speak to Tony Curran, and we spoke about Bertie Auld. We couldn't help but speak about Bertie. And obviously, you've then had the pleasure of speaking to George, who was a teammate of Bertie Auld for a number of seasons. Obviously, when George was coming through as a youngster, he was on the ground staff with Nearly Mocking. Bertie Auld was one of the senior pros, and they ended up playing together. And I think that, some people call him the lost legend. I just call Big George a Celtic legend. Was he on good form, Lawrence?
It was great form. It was actually, obviously, we're talking Celtic, so you couldn't help but talk about Bertie. And he was saying, that Lisbon Lions team had 3 player managers in it, McNeil, Murdoch and Auld. And he said, for him, the key to Lisbon was really Bertie Auld. Mm-hmm. So, nothing but praise for Bertie. He says it was just great to be able to play football with him, and what a guy he was. Says he's just one of the wittiest guys he's ever met. It was mind blowing to be talking to George Connelly.
Definitely. And the big thing is, Georgie's got an incredible memory. When you're talking to him about football, he can tell you who the referee was. I always say that because a lot of footballers played so many games that they don't remember much details about it. But one game that George wasn't involved in was the 1969 Scottish League Cup final, which will forever be remembered for the goal being scored, the winning goal, the only goal being scored by Bertie Auld. We beat St Johnstone in the final that day. And famously or infamously, George's big pal, Davy Hay, ended up having to play left back because Johnstone and Tommy Gemmell had fallen out. And it was quite a shock that he was selected at that time because he was a fairly inexperienced player at that stage. Obviously, he went on to start the European Cup final in 1970, Davy Hay. George came on as a sub. No real surprises today in today's lineup. Let's have a wee look at it. Lawrence, we've got Hart in goals, Ralston at right back, Juranovic playing over on the left with Carter Vickers and Welsh in the centre, Beaton and McGregor in the engine room with Abada, Turnbull and Jota, and Kyogo up front. On the bench, Bain, Scales, Ayeti, McCarthy, Johnstone, Sorrow, Urigide, Forrest and Montgomery. No shocks in that lineup. Is that how you expected Ange to line up today?
Yeah, I think so. We're still fairly threadbare as a squad. Some of the players on the bench, they're short of match fitness, shall we say. So I think he's went with the options he had, hasn't he? Beaton's looking a wee bit more assured the more often he's playing in midfield. So, no shocks at all in the lineup. Hopefully, we can continue our good form. And I'm hoping for a 3-0, although Big George has tipped a 2-0 today.
Right, well, that's interesting because he is an avid follower of Celtic, and whenever I speak to him, he gives some insight. I remember one game we went to, and it was unthinkable on the way through that Kieran Tierney wouldn't be selected. We were talking on the way through in the car, and Big George says, I think Brendan Rodgers is going to rest Kieran Tierney today. and he gave his rationale behind it. Lo and behold, the lineup was given and Tierney was left out. So I love that about the big fella. Celtic through and through, as his whole family was and is. I'm looking through that team. You mentioned Beaton. Now, he has been, part of various discussions on ACSOM over the last couple of weeks, because we know that Ange Postecoglou, let me word this correctly, Ralston and Rogic have been revitalised under Ange Postecoglou. I don't want to say Ange just revitalised them, Lawrence, because a lot of the onus is on the player. But they have been revitalised under Ange Postecoglou. And I think the third player, who may not get the same kind of plaudits, but who certainly has started to step up, and you have absolutely no fear with him today, is Nir Beaton.
Yeah. I mean, the move back to midfield, I think they'd probably call it. I think it certainly suits him. Last game he beat 3 or 4 players on one of his runs. He's starting to just kind of play more like a midfielder, whereas I think there was always a mistake in him at centre half, wasn't there? Whether it was on the turn or not picking up his man. So I think back in midfield where he belongs, and his ball retention's great, gives us a bit of height, but we're not the tallest team. We're going to have to watch them at set pieces. But yeah, I think Beaton's going on to a game. Completely in there in merit. I think we've talked about it a few times. I didn't think kind of Roger Turnbull and McGregor was working. I think McGregor's wasted further back. Although McGregor's one of the 2 players out of the current team that Big George said he'd love to have played with.
Is that right?
He said he'd love to have played with Cal McGregor and Kyogo. Because that's the 2 players I'd really think it would have been great fun to play with out the current crop.
I love hearing things like that. And I do remember, when I was doing the research on the Quality Street gang, I always asked the question, when I was privileged enough and honoured enough to speak to a Lisbon Lion, I did ask the question, would any of the guys have got in your team? And I don't mean the Lisbon team, because we won that day, so why would you make any changes? And there was always this argument that Danny McGrain might have been, selected in that side. And a couple of people have said George Connelly, Kenny Dalglish. So I do find it very interesting when players from yesteryear have a look on the modern game and say, that's a guy I'd love to play with. Now, when we look at Kyogo, he's through the middle, which is, undeniably a massive plus point. We've been speaking around the disappointments of the earlier season. The only real one in recent times has been a scoreless draw at Celtic Park against Livingston. And, a big part of that, I feel, is because Kyogo never started that game. Giakoumakis is injured and Ajeti is on the bench. Now, of course, he is the number 10. And there was a prediction earlier on this week by Kevin Graham to suggest that it would be fitting for the number 10 to score the winning goal. When we come up to January, is Ajeti still one of those guys, do you think, Lawrence, that will be looking to move on? Or when you look at today's situation with one injury to a forward, do you still see him as a decent backup?
I see him as a backup, not too sure about decent. Listen, we can only move him if we're getting other strikers in. We can't run by 3 strikers. Kyogo, come January, he's going to play the full year without a break. So he's already had an injury problem this season.
Yeah.
Giakoumakis his season's not really good going, has it? Start, stop. So it's somewhere we need to strengthen. I'd be looking to strengthen anyway, to have possibly 4. Ajeti, it doesn't look like it's going to work out for him. He's got to be on a fairly hefty wage with us as well. If we can free up some of that wage bill and recoup anything in the money we paid for him, it'll let Ange have more options on what to spend and who to bring in. So, I think he needs to go, but only the proviso, we're going to be bringing in another forward to replace him, because we're just too light there.
We definitely are. Jumping back a wee bit to earlier on today, because we got a wee bit engrossed there and talking about George Connelly, which is fair enough, because he's my favourite ever Celt. But when you look at Tony Curran coming into the penalty spot today, Lawrence, you met him at the Tommy Burns night, didn't you? The play. And you basically asked them to come along and speak to a Celtic state of mind. The thing is, Tony Curran, from time to time, popped up in the comments field. So thanks everybody for getting involved, and I will be coming in and pulling some of your comments in for discussion in just a few moments. But what I done,
it wasn't just me that asked him. Natasha also asked him.
Yes,
to come along. So yeah,
another important member of the ACSOM team, and Tony really assisted us in a big way last year for the charity weekender. We announced during the week there that we're going to be going again on the 4th and the 5th of December for the charity weekender, 24 hours of content. And within that content, there'll be collaborations with other Celtic podcasts. There's going to be some pre-recorded content, because last year, you've got to remember, we were in a pandemic, we're in lockdowns, we couldn't move about as much, and there was an issue with getting people in the building. Lawrence, this year it's different. So today we went and spoke to Tony Curran, and we'll be unveiling that interview on the charity weekender. But he was brilliant last year. He gave us a number of items from his own personal collection for the raffle and the auction. And when the people won the items, he sent them from LA all over the world to make sure that they got their items. So an absolute gentleman. But we were talking today about how cinematic the Celtic story is. And, you were talking to Tony at the Tommy Burns stage show, and David Carswell and Simon Weir put on that show, and, the feedback has been incredible. But it's one of these things that's been discussed time and time again, Lawrence. You see some of the big budget blockbuster kind of movies that are made, not documentaries, but things like The Damned United, that are made about a period in football and are made so well. And I remember years ago reading a story about how there was a suggestion that there had been a script written and Peter Mullen was involved, and the story was going to be called Paradise. And Daniel Day-Lewis may have been involved in it. And it was basically about the beginnings of Celtic. And it's never materialised. I'm talking 15, 20 years ago. So I spoke to Tony today and I says, if it ever happened, which part would you play? It was a tremendous question. Yeah. And he gave a great answer. I'm not going to give it away. But that's the kind of chat we had today. And Tony was doing the sleep out recently at Celtic Park. And it was brilliant to finally catch up with him. But that was down to yourself and Natasha meeting him at the Tommy Burns play, wasn't it, Lawrence?
Yeah, it was, just kind of chance meeting, get some pictures with him and said, look, you're a big Celtic man, obviously, he's I don't know if you know, he mentioned his granddad was responsible for getting Danny McGrain to Celtic Park.
How cool is that? Just amazing. But the thing is, Danny McGrain told me that story. That, right. Tommy Riley had scouted him when he was playing for Scotland under 18s, I think, at Ibrox against England. So it was incredible for that story to come full circle and for Tony to tell me the story today. Let's go back into the defence here. You've got Welsh partnering Carter Vickers. He is the backup at the moment to Starfelt. We're waiting on Julien coming back in. I'm looking at that back line, and I think to myself, I'm still pretty confident with it, particularly with Joe Hart behind him, Lawrence. What's your thoughts?
Listen, I'm confident enough with Hart. Welsh, last time out, I thought he didn't look as comfortable. Maybe that's because he's had a spell out. Maybe that's just that. I thought he had a couple of mistakes in it. I'd have been happy enough if Starfelt had been playing rather than Welsh. St Johnstone are good at set pieces. I expected, they'll maybe come out first 5-10 minutes, maybe try and catch us cold. After that, I can see them, just want to sit in, hang in the game, and maybe, their game plan kind of getting to 15-10 minutes to go at 0-0. Hope we get a bit nervous and go from there. And during the game, they'll just be looking for set pieces, whether it's corner or a free kick that they can throw into the box and see what you get for that. So, yeah, I'd be happy with Starfelt. But, Welsh is a good backup. He's had a good season so far. But I just thought it looked a wee bit rusty last time out.
Yeah, I've been a big champion of him, and I think he is still developing, Lawrence. Sometimes you look at him and he came into the Celtic side at the worst possible time last season, thrown in. And my big frustration when that happens is that the player's never had enough games under his belt. I think by the age of 20, you would hope that a Celtic player has had enough first-team experience that, if you have an injury crisis, you're not throwing them in and just expecting them to, do the butterfly. It's one of these sink or swim scenarios. And I think he's shown a huge amount of, a strong mentality and a huge amount of character to still be part of the plans at this moment in time. And I think he just needs to look over his shoulder at Tony Ralston, and the hard work he's put in to be able to come through and become a Scottish internationalist if he is looking for any kind of inspiration.
Definitely. Listen, I think he's grabbed his chance with both hands. He's come through the academy, which is good for all the boys in the academy as well. Whether it's Ralston, McGregor, Forrest, or now Welsh, they're now looking to say, that route into the first team's there. Listen, Stephen Welsh might be good for a goal for us. He is a danger in the opposition box. He seems to talk the players through the game as well. He seems quite vociferous when he's on the park, which, we need leaders out there, and I think, he could develop into a leader for us.
Well, I hope so. When we look at Ralston, one of the clubs he was loaned out to, of course, was today's opponent, St Johnstone. He had 3 loan deals, one to Queen's Park and another to Dundee United. And I think it was easy enough for us to say he didn't set the heather alight. In saying that, we did have a Dundee United fan in the studio, and Johnny Proctor, who reckoned that he was pretty good at Dundee United. But it looked as though that was going to be his career. Tony, Tony, I'm calling you Tony. I'm thinking of Tony Ralston. That was going to be his career, that he might end up, taking a step down, Lawrence. And, I'm not going to say move into football obscurity because that's disrespectful. And what he's done has been one of the most incredible turnarounds I can remember in a Celtic player.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think anyone would have been disappointed to see him move on. I think we touched on how threadbare the squad was, and that's the only reason he stayed. No one was expecting to be keeping Juranovic out. Even when we signed Juranovic, he'll be taking over from Tony soon. But it's just game and game. He's getting better. He's getting more comfortable. He's still, 22, 23? He's
just turned 23, yeah.
Young for a defender. Ange has rewarded him with a 4 or 5 year contract he's signed. He's praised him. He's praised both him and Taylor. Hopefully saying, look, the fullbacks are really, they're doing what I'm wanting them to do. Which is nice to hear them getting that kind of public acknowledgement. Tony must be, on top of the world from looking as if he was going to leave his beloved Celtic to, he's almost the first name in the team sheet now, isn't he? He's undroppable just now, the form he's in.
No, he absolutely is. And I keep banging on about it, but, I was reminded the other day by Kev Graham of another right back that Tony Ralston has seen off in his time at Celtic since making his debut as a 17-year-old. So let's have a look through them, shall we? Jeremy Toljan, El Hamid, Maurice Bauer, Jeremy Frimpong, John Joe Kenny, and Christian Gamboa. 6 right backs who came, saw, and left. And Tony Ralston's still with us, so fair play to Tony. When we look across that trio of players, Bada, Jota, and Turnbull, I was talking last week about David Turnbull to a very experienced football coach who said that he always rated him as a player at Motherwell. He knew he could make that step up to Celtic, Lawrence, but then he had a concern that he had hit a brick wall. He had maybe hit his ceiling, and he did have a concern about that. But in recent weeks, it looks as though he's got through that sticky patch and he's kicking on. Would you agree with that? Because I know you had a wee concern earlier on this season yourself.
Well, it's kind of that last European game when he won the ball back. It's probably one of the first times I've seen him chase back.
That was magnificent.
To the halfway line. You're thinking, not seen that in him before. So listen, we're employing a manager who develops players, and hopefully, he's seeing weaknesses or areas for improvement in Turnbull's game, and Turnbull's listening and acting on it. He's getting better. Is he going to be the answer? He's still to do it in a truly big game for the wee. And this is a big game, this semi-final. Win this, through to the final. Keeps the treble on. I know we get used to it. Apart from last season, we get fairly used to trebles, but we'd like to get back into that, wouldn't we? And he's another player, 22. He does have a lot ahead of him. As much as, I thought him and Roger didn't work, it's probably to the detriment of both of them playing on the same side, because both of them they aren't the most industrious players, shall we say. So it leaves a lot for Callum to do. So maybe he's looking better because Callum's playing further forward. We've got Beaton who's coming into a game. Maybe that's helping Turnbull, as well.
Possibly. When I go back to this Livingston game, And it was a frustrating day at the office, Lawrence, and it was one of these ones where we almost got out of the jail at the end with a penalty kick. And you reminded me today, actually, that there was a couple of chances even after the penalty where we should have scored. One of them fell to Turnbull, of course. And during that game, at 75 minutes, I remember thinking to myself, and I asked the question at the end, what do you do in a scenario like this? Because there is a potential that we're going to be up against a similar game plan today, Lawrence, in St Johnstone, right? Who, by the way, we'll get to in a wee moment because we know everything that they have done well over the last 12, 18 months. But if they defend like Livingston defended today, the big question for me is, because I really am interested in people who watch the game and make observations. I love the stats and the figures and the data analysis of the likes of Alan Morrison, who comes on to ACSOM on a regular basis as well. But you bring all that together. The question is, in these very specific moments, how do you make a decision to change the game? Because that is basically on the manager. So over the last few weeks, I have been talking to anybody that's come into the studio who's got the coaching background at any level. What do you do in a scenario like that? And I've heard a few different kind of theories on it. One of the theories, of course, and we mentioned it on the day, was we've got players like Turnbull and McGregor. And then previously we had players like, Christie, and even longer ago than that, with players like Armstrong, who could change a game with a bit of magic from 25, 30 yards. And that was my frustration against Livy, because we didn't see enough of that. Turnbull's that man, isn't he? He's the guy that if we are up against, two walls of five, he might be able to pull something out the bag. Is that a disappointment? Do you think that, that's a situation where we should have more options than just take a ping?
Well, sometimes it is. You look at Cat Vickers against Dundee. You've got to take that shot. It wasn't an absolute clear view of goal, but he's hitting it through bodies. It takes deflection. We get the goal. We go and get another two others. Sometimes you've got to. You can't wait for the perfect glimpse of goal. You've got to go. Well, I'm hitting this kind of hard and low into the box. There's a lot of bodies there. We might get a deflection. We might pick up the second ball. You're disrupting what they're trying to do then, aren't you? If you're just trying to play around them and they're fairly well drilled defensively, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to turn them because they'll be sitting so deep. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, a bit of magic, or someone just willing to say, you know what, I'm going to have a shot here. It's maybe not perfect, but something might come off. Because I think against Livingston, we just kept crossing the ball in. There was no dead air, and you're going, well, this isn't working. We're needing someone to take the responsibility. And well, listen, you said maybe David Turnbull, but Beaton used to have a fair shot from distance on him before.
He did.
McGregor, now he's playing further forward.
Mm-hmm.
You've got three midfielders there. You can, well, you can all hit a decent shot. So
these are the games. These are the games, Lawrence, that if you don't get that goal, it's very frustrating, because that team will just continue with the game. If you get the goal, they've got to come out, and then the whole thing's different. That's where you can really start taking teams to the sword. But against Livingston, and this is always my concern over the last month, where Ange deservedly won the Manager of the Month award, that was the one tiny little negative. And I was just looking at it to try and figure out, what do we do again? Because it will happen again this season. It will happen again this season. Obviously, long-range efforts are one way of doing it. Another way, I think, is that in the vast expanses of a Celtic Park or a Hampden, you've got to look at it if it's constant possession, which it was against Livy. I mean, let's remember, 85-15 was the possession. Both teams got done for 10 fouls, by the way, that day, Lawrence. Yeah. But 85-15. Would it not be a case of, why do you need four at the back when you're playing against a stuffy team like that? Why not just get more bodies forward? Is that too gung-ho?
No, well, then St Johnstone will obviously react to that one. They might go, right, there's a bit more space. But, their tactic's going to be hit on the break. But, Ange, I don't think he's frightened. I mean, part of that's the inverted fullbacks creating more in midfield. He is pushing guys further forward to try and create an overload, isn't he? Yeah. So I think you can do it without necessarily changing the personnel. Just because you set up 4-3-3, you're not going to keep that formation all game. You should be changing your formation throughout the game. So I think you'll probably see Ralston play pretty far forward if they're sitting in deep. So No, it's definitely something we're going to have to try. On any time we get a transition, I think it's going to be. We need to do it quickly. We need to be saying to you on the left, hug the touchline, or on the right, hug the touchline, stretch the pitch. Because when we get a transition, we want there to be space to play the ball into. And if that front three can stretch that pitch, it makes it easier for us. So
I'm just having a look at the footage at the moment, Lawrence, and it was great to see that tifo with Bertie's name on it. Of course, Celtic are going to be wearing the number 10 shorts today as well, just as we're preparing for the teams to take the park. It's a nighttime game. It's under the lights. I think it's a sellout, isn't it? I'm pretty sure it's a sellout.
Sell out. I mean, those lights aren't as good as the disco lights at Celtic Park, but it is indeed under the lights. But yeah, no, it's a sellout. And I think that was down to the Tuesday Club, because when we went on air, it wasn't a sellout. We mentioned it. There were still tickets for public sale, and by the end of the show, sold out.
You just never know who's watching this show, Lawrence. 4-0, says Richard Coleman. And I think earlier on, Lawrence, you said it was going to be 3-0. Do you stand by that prediction?
Yeah. Yeah, going to go with 3-0. Listen, all those players will have had some experience of meeting Bertie. You've heard Callum speaking about him. I think they're really going to want to go and put a performance on. They're really going to want to entertain the fans. They'll remember Bertie and some of his famous lines. So, yeah, I'm going to stand by 3-0.
There are certain games that are synonymous with the Lions, when they pass, and cup finals where we're wearing the number 7, or today where we're not wearing the number 10. The day when Simonovic scores the goal in the 67th minute, and he looks to the heavens. And the big thing is, I'm proud to have that kind of emotional attachment to my football club, Lawrence. I think that there's a hell of a lot of these massive clubs, particularly down south, where they've kind of lost that a wee bit. That attachment, that emotional attachment, whereby if your team gets beat, it actually affects you. It's not like you just wake up and go, oh well, just a defeat. And it's not as though we've got that element of the tourist fan, as they're called, where people just come and go to the games. It's the hardcore that we've got, and that hardcore of fans have been up in arms recently. So it's great to see how they're able to pull together in such a way to give us the tifo. But the groups are still unhappy, Lawrence, and they are appealing to the club to not appoint Bernard Higgins. It is still a massive bone of contention for many, many fans. And I think that we're in a scenario now. I've not had a chance to talk to you since the AGM on ACSOM. We're in a scenario that we've seen a kind of change in attitude towards the Celtic board, or the Celtic hierarchy, at that AGM during the week. It's pretty clear that there's very little confidence in various members of that board. Do you think that if they ignore the pleas of the influential fan groups who are appealing to them, and they go ahead and they appoint this individual, this figure, it's the beginning of the end for the current figures that are already polarising the Celtic support?
Well, it'd be definitely a confrontational move, wouldn't it? You think you'd really get out this, because on the face of it, it looks like they want to confront that fan group. That looks like the basis for it. If it certainly wasn't when it started to get rumoured, now that the fan group have made their feelings known, and quite rightly so, what a lot of them have suffered under that offensive behaviour at Football Act, they're saying, look, this is a guy that implemented it aggressively against Celtic fans.
Aggressively, yes.
And I think that they're of the opinion it was more aggressively against Celtic fans than perhaps fans of other clubs. So they're saying, this guy just shouldn't be here. And you've got to ask yourself, if it's not for a confrontation, why is it that they're appointing him? They've said it's for safety. Well, there's a guy like David Ross, loves Celtic, runs safety at Hampden and various large-scale events. Would he not be better suited to it if it is for a safety role?
There will be other candidates.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is it an open and fair recruitment process, or are we picking him because he used to be a police officer and we want him in and we know it's going to upset the Green Brigade? It just seems a really, really strange way to go. Just as a club, Ange's got the team and the fans kind of back together. We can see progress on the park. To then come out and do this, it's almost like shooting yourself in the foot.
No, it is. It is. And we've spoken about the impact of Ange Postecoglou. Just looking at that St Johnstone side, we have McCart starting it in the centre. He's had a lot of interest from Hibs and other clubs. Obviously, he started his career with Celtic. He's gone on to win a number of domestic trophies. Fair play to him. Big Rooney, who has Celtic connections as well, and O'Halloran. So let's go to the action where we will be observing a minute's silence, and we will see you all at half-time on A Celtic State of Mind.